and welcome to my channel. I am Angela Brennan and today I'm bringing you Spellbinders Stitching Die of the Month, July 2024. Yes, it's July and we've started with some Christmas cards. It's a pretty straightforward stitching die where I make two types of cards. You can combine it all in one card, but I decide to split it. So this stitching die is all about making a bow on the card front. And then you've got the circular ones on the side. You can put it together as the background, or you can use it separately, and I choose to do the latter. What I'm doing here is I'm using all the die cuts of the outline with the stitching elements, taping them together with the best ever craft tape, and then I'm going to die cut them with some teal card. It's pretty straightforward, but I still managed to mess it up. But the stitching's fine. The stitching's easy enough to do because you just follow the etching on the die cuts and you just follow through. Pretty straightforward, that bit. But you see, when I put the bow, the shadow bit is meant to go at the top, but I put it at the bottom. But it's okay, I do make the cards, but when I'm doing the video and taking the pictures, I realized I made a bit of a boo-boo, so I do correct it. Now I'm cutting some shadow in some silver card here. You don't have to do this, but I decided to do it with the outline of the shapes because I thought it looks nice. That's just optional. It's not something you have to do. I start by using some metallic silver thread here. I use all 6 strands of the metallic thread because it's kind of hard to separate metallic thread. It gets a little bit knotted and gets frayed. I just think it's easier, and because I'm not using the same stitching in the same hole, so it's easy enough to put it through the stitching of this particular die cut here and follow the etched lines. So I do that and I secure the back, the start and the end of the stitching by using cello tape. Nice and easy. If you're a beginner, don't start with metallic threads. It's a little bit harder because you need to make sure it's taut before you go to the next hole that you're stitching. If you're a beginner, start with cotton thread. You can use the LUCA-S cotton threads, which is slightly less expensive, or you could use DMC thread, whichever. I think both of them look nice and they're nice sheen to the cotton. Both of them come with 6 strands, and you can either use 4 strands or all 6 strands for this particular die cut because it doesn't have holes where you have to repeatedly put them through, therefore creating a little bit of a stiffness or difficulty to put through it, except for the middle bit that I'm doing here. So if you look at this one, the middle bit here, you have to put through it at least 8 or 9 times. So this one you probably want to use at least only 4 strands maximum. If not, you'll have difficulty putting the thread through the middle of the die cut. As you do these stitching dies, you'll get the hang of it and you will realize when you can use 6 strands, when you can use 4 strands. I generally use 4 strands, but this particular one, because I'm using metallic thread, I decided to use all 6 strands. But for the middle element of it, I'm only using 4 strands. It's a little bit difficult to separate metallic thread, for me anyway, but I do it and then I feel the other 2 strands are kind of wasted. The other alternative to metallic thread is using the DMC Diamant metallic thread, and I use that for the other example that I do. So I'll put all the products I use in the description below so it's easy for you to access the links and you can have a look and see which one you want to use. So generally now I tend to use up all the thread I already have. If I'm buying new thread, cotton thread, I tend to buy LUCA-S thread because, as I said, it's less dearer and it's 100% cotton, 6-strand thread, and I just think it does the job. And if you're doing cards, I don't see the need to use expensive thread. As long as the sheen maintains and it doesn't fray, that's fine. It does the job. So once I finish stitching all of this, if you will notice, the bit that I'm doing now and the 2 tiny rectangles, I double it. So I do 2 of it because you use it twice on the card. So I just put all of the, what I call the shadow of each shape so that it looks on the card nicer. I think it looks nicer. It gives it a bit of a 2-dimension. Now you may not really see the impact of it, but when I started to do it, I decided to do it for all of the shapes. And then I just use liquid glue to adjust where I want the shadow to go. Now, if you see, I'm putting the shadow here this way, but when I do rectify it, I do take it out and put it the other way. You'll see what I mean when you get to the end of the video, and you'll see what a boo-boo I've done. I'll show you when I put the card together. So it doesn't matter. Personally, I think the bow can go either way. The shadow can be at the bottom or it can be at the top. It really depends on how you want to put your bow together. Now, stitching dies is not for everybody. You don't necessarily have to stitch on this if you don't want to. You can easily put a metallic card behind it and let the color show through the stitching bits. But I think when you are stitching dies with etched lines, you should just stitch them and give it a go. Now, you can either use metallic thread or you can use something a monotone. So one of my other card examples I'll show, I use a green on green. So it depends really what you want. Now for the background of this bow, I'm going to use the embossing folder of the month, which is the Hexy Snowflake. So I'm doing a little bit of ink blending with my Distress Oxide inks here, just to give it a bit of background, and then I'm going to do some embossing. I've really taken to doing quite a lot of ink blending in my cards lately. So just as a reminder, the key to good ink blending is using the right card. I'm using the Strathmore Bristol Smooth card here. And then it's also good to use the domed foam, so you've got really nice smooth ink blending. And it's easier to ink blend Distress Oxide inks, for me anyway. I'm inking my ink pad here to make it nice and juicy. Remember, for Distress Oxide inks, you really shake your refill, and when you put the ink, you put it all over the surface, because the ink will just sit where you put it, so it doesn't seep through. So make sure you put it all over the surface, so whenever your foam pad touches the ink pad, it really gets the ink onto it. I'm just putting a wet stamp chamois on the back of the card, so to just soften the card fibers a little bit before I put it through the embossing folder. And I'm using the debossed pattern here. I like the debossed better than the embossed pattern because some embossing folders, I prefer the debossed pattern. So here I'm going with the debossed. I do make a card later on with the embossed pattern on as the background. So it really depends. I'll do another video showcasing more techniques on the embossing folder, but for now I'm just using it as the background because I think it gives a nice background to indicate it as a Christmas card. Now it doesn't have to be a Christmas card because it's got snowflakes on it. I think it's probably good to be a nice birthday card around Christmas time, if that makes sense. So sometimes you struggle to make a birthday card that more goes with the holiday theme. So I think that kind of goes with this. I generally put some foam sheet behind an embossed panel, but I didn't do it this time because I left the embossed panel in the embossing folder, put a heavy object on it so that it would dry straight. So I didn't see the need to have any additional thickness or the need to add a foam sheet behind it to make it straighter because it wasn't warped. So this is where I'm putting the bow together, and I really should put the shadow bit at the top. Check out the two cards on the left and the right. The one on the left shows you the shadow of the bow at the bottom, and the one on the right shows you the shadow of the bow at the top. It's meant to be at the top. I do rectify it later on. It's not difficult to rectify it. But I think even if it's the one on the left, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it's a big deal. Do you think it's a big deal? Let me know. But I do rectify it at the end. I just add some foam, dimensional foam at the back of the bow to give it a little bit of height, because as I know, when there are layers on the front of the card, I like to make sure it's even, and that's why I have my 1mm dimensional foam, just to give it that additional height. You could leave the bow without the two legs, as I call it. I do make a card without that. But here I decide to add the legs, which is the end of the bow, just to give it that full look for this particular card. And I'm just adding the center of it. And there you go, voila, the card is done. And this particular club kits come with really nice sentiments with the clear stamp of the month, which complements all the other club kits for the month of July. And I use that sentiment there, believe in the magic. It's easy to do, and I love it. The other element of this die set, stitching die of the month, is these little circular bits. Now you could cut these circular bits and put it as the background of the bow, but I didn't want it all to be in one card, so I decided to do this separately. Now this ended up being it's a labor of love, this bit of it. It takes a little bit of time. But the first card I don't do any stitching. I just die cut the stitched element, the background, and the outline, which is the circular bits. So 3 bits to each row, easy enough to put together. And I just did it with some pinks and purples with different gradations or different hues of the colors. And I think it turned out quite pretty. When I use liquid glue on thin die cuts, I always press it onto a non-stick scrap paper so it doesn't smear when I put it onto the die cut. With no stitching on the stitched element, you can see the metallic grey card come through the holes. And here you go, all of them completed. For the background of this card, I'm going to use the embossing folder of the month as well, but I'm going to just put it as plain white, not to take away from the colorful circular patterns. Per usual, I spray the card to soften the fibers of the card, put it through the embossing folder. Remember to use the sandwich for a 2D embossing folder, and this is the embossed side of it, which is pretty as well. And then when you flip it over, you see the debossed side as well, which I like a little bit better. So I can use either side of it, which is a bit of a bonus, so you get 2 sides to it. I attach it to the front of the card. I always emboss the panel slightly bigger to the card front so I can put it onto the card front with double-sided tape, and then I can cut off the excess so I know I have a nice snug fit to the card front. This is an A2 size card which measures 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, primarily because the length of the circular design is just fitting for the front of an A2 card, which is 4¼ which is across the portrait. I do use this to make A7 cards later on, so you can still use it on different size cards. You're not confined to using them on A2 cards. So I do like to use different size cards. I attach all of them to the front of the card with double-sided tape, and the sentiments, making spirits bright to you and yours, is from the clear stamp of the month, and it goes so well with the theme of the card. Since I didn't do any stitching, I didn't want to leave the center of the snowflake empty, so I decided to put a whole load of gems. A little bit much on the gems, I think, but I still think it looks really pretty and adds to the card to give it that bit of sparkle and uniqueness. I used the row of circular die for the next card as well, but I decided to do some stitching. I used 3 strands of the LUCA-S white thread here, and when you remove the strands, remember to remove them one by one so you don't knot your thread and waste it. Then you gather all the 3 strands together and you put it through the needle with a threader. That's the only way I can put my thread through the needle. Use a threader and put it through the needle. I'm using DMC Tapestry needle size 24 here because I think it's perfect for the holes, the size of the holes in this stitching die. Because it's such a tiny stitching die at the back, I do not use sellotape to secure the back of the thread. I just trap the thread as I'm stitching through the circular element. I trap the thread as I'm going through each of the holes from the middle. Easy enough to do, you just need a little bit of practice and you'll know what I mean. I've done this a few times in various stitching videos. So this way, you don't need a sellotape, and it's so tiny, the little area at the back, it's a little bit hard to use sellotape or any kind of adhesive to adhere the thread. So you just trap it and you just continue stitching. And you can use the same thread for the entire row. You don't have to keep changing it for each individual circle. You can use it for the entire row of circular elements. I think these are tiny snowflakes, so I'm going to be using the white thread all through. It takes a little bit of time, but all you need to do is listen to an audiobook or watch a TV program, catch up with one of your programs, and then you stitch away, because the next I make another card which does lots of stitching. It takes me a little while, but then I do love stitching dies. If you love stitching dies, this is great to do. I might use them again in another card within the Clubkits. Will be making all of the Clubkits. Well, I've got most of the Clubkits, and I'll be putting out various videos for the July Clubkits. I do lots of Spellbinders Clubkits videos as well as their monthly core collection releases. So do check out my YouTube channel. If you enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when new videos are uploaded. All the products I've used are listed in the description below for your ease of reference, so do check it out. So when I do this stitching, it's easy enough to do. You just follow the etched lines and you just can do the stitching accordingly. So for this one here, I'm using only 4 strands. If you see, you're putting the thread through the middle quite a few times. So if you use 6 strands, it'll be too tight to go through the middle and you might end up tearing your die cut. So you want to be careful about that. You can use 3 strands, but I think 4 strands would be the maximum. I'm using 4 strands here of cotton thread, LUCA-S cotton thread, and it stitches beautifully. I don't have any problems with it. Here I've used quite a few pinks and reds hues, different hues, all from the same paper pack, and die cut loads of lines. I'm going to put this all on the front of an A7 card. So it's a larger card, which is 5 by 7. And all those little circles that come, it'd be such a waste to let it go. So I do make another cut with those circles. Do check it out what I do. So I die cut the stitched element, but also the outline with the same colored card. I wanted to put white, but I thought it was a bit stark, so I decided to let it blend with the same colored card, and I do all of them. As you can see, it'll take a little bit of time, but I think it's worth it. Sometimes some of the cards, you got these little elements here. If you take time and patience to put it together, I do like the end product, and I think it looks really pretty. So it's easy enough to put them all together. And then I use some liquid glue and I'm putting into a card front. Initially, I decided to put it on the card front itself of the A7 card, but it doesn't quite fit accordingly. So I end up cutting it down and then putting some foam sheet behind it and placing it on the front of an A7 card. So you can use these elements to make different size cards. It doesn't always have to be an A2 card. Personally, I think A2 cards are a little bit small, so I do like to make slightly bigger cards. So this card here, I do put it in a zigzag because I want it to be quite flush for each of the rows. And I do think it looks a little bit different from the previous card, where you have a little bit of a little hole between them. So I've put some foam sheet here and I'm putting it on the front of an A7 card, which is 5 inches by 7 inches front folding card. And again, I've got all of these sentiments that I've stamped and die cut with a coordinating die from Clear Stamp and Die of the Month, July 2024, which is called Christmas Magic Sentiments, which is a great set for the club kits of this month. And I just adhere it with some liquid glue. I really like how this card came out. Let me know what you think. Now, for all the little circles, I didn't want it to go to waste. So I die cut the outline of the circles for each of the rows in white. I decided to put it in the card, use some double-sided adhesive sheet and put all of the circles on the front. This is an A2 sized card front and I'm putting it all on the front of it. Now, though I'm using an A2 sized card here, I end up putting this onto an A7 card. So just see what I do, because I thought it's just too squeezed if it's all on an A2 card front. So though the element of it, all the outlines and the circles will go on this, because there's so many of them, I decided to use a double-sided adhesive sheet, which is so much easier to just put all the little circles into. I just put it randomly, as long as they're not, the each colors are not next to each other. So I just put it randomly, use up all those circles. I still have got some balance actually, so I didn't use up all of it. I have some balance, but I've used up most of it, so it doesn't go to waste, because it's a good quality colored card and I really, really did not want it to go to waste. So just randomly put all the circles. And I think all the colors go together. And that's a good thing about using hues of different colors from card packs that are from one pack. So you know all the colors will coordinate and go together. So you don't have to think too much of whether they will go together or not, because I think they still go together. You got different pinks and reds here, some dark and some light. And I'm going to see all those little elements there, the middle, that little bits that are still got adhesive on it. So I'm just putting some glitter so it's not sticky. I did think whether I was going to put embossing powder or glitter. I decided to go with glitter because I think if I put embossing powder and I heat it up, it might undo some of the adhesive on the back of the elements that have already stuck down. So glitter, what it does, it just adds a shiny element to all the outstanding bits or the leftover adhesives, and I'm just burnishing it with my bone folder so the glitter gets right into the exposed adhesive, and therefore one thing about glitter, it goes all over the place, but you just need to get I've got this sheet that I used, I can't remember what it's called, but this sheet that I have that gets rid of all the glitter bits. I think it's called dryer sheets or washable dryer sheets. Basically, it's sheets that you can do and you wipe up all the glitter and it sticks to the glitter. Easy enough to get rid of it. I have lots and lots of glitter and I don't use it primarily because it's so messy, but I need to start using it more. So these are the sheets that I use, and I've got a whole load of it, and it just can wipe off the glitter quite easily and you can get rid of it. Well, it'll stick to some of bits of your clothes if you, after a little while, you'll still see it there. But I think it looks really pretty and it fills up all that exposed adhesive. And I'm going to just stick it onto the front of an A7 card, and I use the same clear stamp and die of the month to create some sentiments. And if you look at this here, it's got some nice sentiments and the coordinating dies, and I'm showing them here. You can use that dies to die cut the sentiments easily. When I've got coordinating dies for the sentiment, what I tend to do is I do die cut extra bits so I can layer the sentiment and give it a little bit of dimension and depth. I think it's perfect. Why not when you have the coordinating die set that goes with your sentiments? So I just stamp it onto dark blue card using my embossing powder, white embossing powder, die cut it with a coordinating die, and voila, you have some amazing sentiments to go onto your card. I put the stamp onto the card, pick it up with the door of my stamping platform, prepare the stamp with the stamp conditioning eraser because they're new stamps, treat the card with anti-static powder, apply clear embossing ink onto the stamp and press it with a stamp press tool. I'm putting the ink here twice because I think my clear embossing ink pad needs to be inked, refilled. And then I sprinkle some white embossing powder. Remove the stray embossing powder with a dry paintbrush, and then I will use my Wow embossing heat tool to melt the embossing powder and then use the coordinating die to die cut the sentiment. As mentioned, I will die cut extra die cuts of the sentiment so I can layer them and give the sentiment a little bit of dimension. I use liquid glue to do this because it's easy enough to give it some time to adjust it. So I put it together and then I adjust it so it all aligns and it's nice and snug. For the final card, I decide to die cut the stitching die with white card and do some inking as I usually do. I'm keeping it really simple here. So this card here, I'm using Distress ink, evergreen bow, and pine needles to do some inking. I'm just using one color, just basically creating a colored card. And then I'm going to use this on a background that I've ink blended. I'm not having what I call the legs of the bow because I'm just going to do the bow on its own. And here I'm inking the shadow bit of the bow. You don't have to do this, as I mentioned. This is something I do because I think it just looks better on the card. It's a personal preference. And I'm using the stamp wheel to do my inking per usual because it's got a sticky mat. So it doesn't have to be the stamp wheel. Any sticky mat that's in the market will do the job. I think it just makes the whole ink blending easier, especially if it's smaller die cuts that you're inking on. And here, when I'm stitching the long rectangle, it's a little bit, it can get a little bit floppy. So to give it a bit more sturdiness, I put a thick card behind it. So it's easier to stitch those long stitches, basically. If not, it gets a little bit floppy. So if you can see, when I use my cotton thread here, it's a lot easier because the rectangle is quite sturdy with a thick card reinforced behind it. So you'll see me put this card together with an ink blended background. Here I've used the same colored thread just for a little bit of differentiation. Here's the mess I made. If you look at the card on the left, you'll see the shadow at the bottom, and the card on the right, the shadow of the bow at the top. I think it looks good either way, but I just remove it and I correct it. So it's not difficult to do. As I say, I do make mistakes in my cards sometimes, and I just take it out and I just put it back together. So it's easy enough to do. Just remove the foam tapes and put it back together. And here are all the cards I've made. This card here, the red and gold, you'll see I used the embossed element as the background, and the one on the left, the blue and purple, I used the debossed background of the hexy snowflake. And then I've got another ink blended background for the bow without the legs. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when new videos are uploaded. Do check out the rest of my videos. If you do subscribe, you will get a notification because you'll see the rest of my videos of my Spellbinders Clubkits as well as their new releases from their core collection on a monthly basis. Do hold on and check out the close-up pictures of all the cards that I've created at the end of the video. Thank you so much for stopping by. Happy crafting, and I'll catch you at my next video. Do take care.